Hi, I'm Caroline Turner, and I'm going to talk about a natural resource that is very plentiful in the state of Alaska that may impact you in one way or another, either in your diet or you may go after this resource as a sport. You may have guessed that I'm talking about fishing. And I'm going to now read a poem from our class anthem called The Fish by Elizabeth Bishop. And this is from our class text, Literature and the Environment. The Fish by Elizabeth Bishop. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water with my hook, fast in the corner of his mouth. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and its pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper. Shapes like full-blown roses stained and lost through the age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of line, and infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down, while his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen, the frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood that can cut so badly. I thought of the coarse white flesh packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, and the swim bladder, like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed, the irises backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil, seen through the lenses of old scratched isinglass. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like the tipping of an object toward the light. I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet, and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4 and a wire leader with the swivel still attached, with all their 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. A green line frayed at the end where he broke it, 2 heavier lines, and a fine black thread, still crimped from the strain and snap where it broke and he got away. Like metals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, a 5-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. I stared and stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat. From the pool of bilge where oil had spread a rainbow around the rusted engine to the bailer rusted orange, the sun-cracked thwarts, the oarlocks on their strings, the gunwales, until everything was rainbow, rainbow, rainbow. And I let the fish go. So the goal of my presentation is to help us become responsible citizens, capable of transcending the confines of specialized knowledge. Regarding the poem, The Fish, at first, the author is impressed that she caught a large fish, but then she begins to notice him, and she calls the fish a him, and so we know that she is personifying the fish. He is becoming more like a person to her. She doesn't realize it at first, but in looking at him and talking about how he is aging, she realizes that he's an old-timer, and she says he is venerable, which means he's worthy of honor. And I like how she compared the fish's old skin to rose wallpaper and lime rosettes, and his air bladder to a peony, because I like flowers also. I think that Bishop must have liked flowers. But then she sees that he's a decorated hero, that he has gotten away at least 4 or 5 times from other fishermen or fisherwomen. And she notices the colors of the oil leaking from the engine of the older boat. and the colors in the other parts of the boat. And she begins realizing through the rainbows that there's a victory occurring. The victory is that this fish has survived all these years and many catches before. And she decides that, she caught him and that's wonderful. But she decides because he's made it through so much that she's going to let him go. So Bishop is celebrating the fish, and which leads us to the next part of my presentation. My plan is to celebrate and honor fish today in my presentation. Fish are one of the bountiful resources of our country, and especially here in Alaska, the 49th state of the Union. People come from all over the world to fish here, tens of thousands, and we have salmon, halibut, trout, and other fin fish, and people fish under subsistence, personal use, as well as sport fishing regulations. And of course, there is also a large commercial fishing that goes on in Alaska, commercial fishing industry. So where we are today is called Taku Lake, and this lake is one of the waterways in Anchorage, Alaska, that is stocked with fish to help bolster the natural supply of the fish. And there's also bike trails, as you can see here. And some things, they have this sign here to kind of give you some guidelines about the waterways. And I think this is a great example of how the state has worked hard to make sure that we keep the fish as healthy as they can be, and make it fun for everybody, but healthy for everybody at the same time. So they talk about how healthy salmon need good water quality, and to keep your trash, oil, and other pollutions out of the creeks, that we properly dispose of household chemicals because those are toxic, so those need to be taken to the landfill and disposed of properly. We need to respect the creek banks and avoid trampling, cutting, or mowing vegetation along the banks. We need to scoop the poop if you take your pets around the lake or any of the bike trails and near the waterways. It needs to be disposed of properly. We're supposed to keep a buffer of native trees and vegetation along the stream lines. Along the stream banks. And one of the things they've actually spelled out here is do not introduce northern pike into our waters. As most of us are aware, the pikes are very voracious eaters, and they end up destroying ecosystems and eating the natural fish in the waterways. So they've got that spelled out here. They suggest that we only plant native flowers and shrubs and trees, and non-native, such as they give the example of purple loosestrife, can destroy the salmon habitat. And then they say to direct the rainwater from your gutter downspout through a rain garden. And the rain gardens filter stormwater and help keep the creek water clean as well. And they ask for you to volunteer, participate in citywide creek cleanup events and other beautification programs. And it's actually spring cleanup here in Anchorage this week. And then lastly, they have a website to learn more about salmon and creek stewardship. They have a salmoninthecity.muni.org website that we can go to. So we've made a lot of effort to take good care of the fish here, as you can see. And people benefit from all over the United States and of course even beyond, and come up here and fish. Hi, so I have with me my stepfather, Tony Petrone. He has a master's degree in geology, and he's semi-retired. He's been working as a substitute school teacher for the Anchorage School District, and also has a long history of fishing, 60 years, and loves fishing, and has been a teacher to a lot of people how to fish, myself and my children as well, and has a lot of great fish stories and experiences. And Tony, I know that every year the school district does something, the elementary schools with the salmon, with the silver salmon, and it's kind of unique. And why don't you tell us what that is that they do?
Yes, every year the school district will send some students down to the fish hatchery at Ship Creek, and they'll collect some eggs and spawn, and they'll spawn the eggs for the schools, and they'll bring the eggs back to the aquarium in schools, and then they'll raise them for 6 months or 7 months till they're ready to be released in April or May, and they release them at Taku Lake, so the children then can go and catch the silver salmon there in the springtime or all year round.
And this is where we did the first part of the presentation, was down at Taku Lake. That's the same lake that we're talking about here. So it's a pretty neat experience. I've been on a couple of field trips with the kids going down there, and it's pretty exciting. So salmon are very much a part of our culture here in Anchorage. Well, thank you, Tony, for sharing with us, and I'd like to thank you for the legacy of fishing that you've given our family, neighbors' children, and even people that have come from other countries and other states and stayed when you guys had your bed and breakfast going. And you've just given a lot to a lot of people. And I just want to thank you for that, and thank you for helping us be a truly Alaskan family.
You're welcome.
The next part of my presentation is an interview with a fisheries biologist. Unfortunately, he was out of town and unable to join me in person, but we did have an email interview, and so I'm going to share that interview with you now. His name is Dan Young. He's a fisheries biologist at Lake Clark National Park and Preserve in Southwest Alaska. He's been working in his position since 2003. Before that, he worked as a seasonal biological technician and general ranger for about 10 years. He's worked with the U.S. Forest Service, Alaska State Parks, and National Park Service, among other things. And over the years, he's worked with plants, bears, eagles, shorebirds, fish, and water. He attended the College of William and Mary in Virginia for his undergraduate degree and received his graduate degree in fisheries from the University of Alaska in Fairbanks in 2004. I asked him what drew him to his field, and he said, "My love of outdoors and interest in learning new things." I asked him what are the most common human behaviors which negatively impact the water and fish in Alaska, and he said, "I'm not sure what the most common human behaviors are that impact water and fish in Alaska waterways. That said, I believe fishing activity, and particularly commercial fishing, has one of the largest impacts on the fish population in the state." He said, "Thankfully, the state and the federal governments have done a pretty decent job managing the resource and maintaining sustainable populations over the years. I believe the biggest threat to water and fish in the state are the introduced species, large resource development projects like the Pebble Mine and Donlin Creek Mine, and large-scale hydro projects like the Susitna-Watana Hydro Project." I asked what suggestions he would have for college students in order to help change the culture more toward conservation with regard to water and fish, and he said, "My one piece of advice is to be engaged and participate in what is going on around you. Educate yourself on the issues and then work toward a solution. I find that younger adults, including college students, are very good at this and help inspire others with their idealism. I suggest you keep fighting for what you see as important for fish and water." I asked if he had a favorite piece of environmental literature, and he said he's always loved the classics by folks like Rachel Carson and Edward Abbey, both of which we read in the class. And he said they got me inspired to appreciate the world around us and not take it for granted. I asked if there was anything else he would like to include, and he said that we're lucky in Alaska to be dealing with mostly intact ecosystems. He said this is something we shouldn't take for granted, and most of his colleagues that work in the lower 48 deal with impaired waterways and the ramifications of introduced species. Most of their work is focused on restoration activities. He said he believes it's virtually impossible to recreate an intact ecosystem, and rather than spend money on reacting to our impacts, we should focus on protecting the resources we have. And with that said, I asked him how he felt about genetically modified fish, and he said, "I'm not a fan, bad idea." As my presentation draws to a close, I would like to include some highlights from this brochure, How to Be an Ethical Angler, which was created by the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. Hopefully you can see that. How to be an ethical angler. Be respectful of wildlife. Give wildlife the right of way. Do not destroy plants along the water. They provide cover and help keep the water cool. Do not litter. Keep your fishing area clean. Pick up trash and leave the area cleaner than you found it. Know the bag limit and keep only the fish you will use. Release the rest unharmed. Keep injured fish unless it's prohibited by size or bag limit regulations. Do not snag unless you know for certain it is allowed in the area you're in. Never squeeze a fish or rip the hook out. Never throw a fish. Never put your fingers in the gills or eyes. Never pick the fish up by the tail, and never let the fish thrash around on the ground. Common sense, but things we need to remember so that we're showing respect to nature. In concluding my presentation, just as Bishop relayed in her poem, The Fish, fish are an awesome resource, not to be taken for granted or worse, abused or even wiped out. We need to be diligent to keep our waterways unpolluted and healthy for the fish, plants, and wildlife that live there, and to prevent erosion in the habitat also. We should never bring non-native plants or fish to other areas or attempt to transplant them, resulting in an altered or damaged ecosystem, which will be difficult or impossible to ever repair. We need to also caution others to do the same. Thankfully, we've learned that Alaska has taken many steps to protect and nurture this wonderful resource, a resource that is part of many healthy American diets and provides a wonderful pastime and incentive for many of us to get out and enjoy nature. I hope the information I've shared about our wonderful natural resource, the fish, helps us become more responsible citizens, capable of transcending the confines of specialized knowledge. We need to celebrate the fish.